It would be really easy to get all emotional over the fact that having my mom die some 17 years ago, she left me before I fully understood just how fragile life could be. I didn't ever get to sit down with her and pore over all her pictures, talk about the stories. I never asked her any questions about her life growing up. I never made sure to get photos of her and I together, those important selfies. The list just goes on and on with my regrets. I just found myself busy with all that comes with raising 3 children, all very active as kids usually are, as well as just trying to keep my little tiny small business chugging along. Life just got busy. How could I have known that she would not be with me forever? Oscar Wilde has a beautiful quote that says, "Behind every exquisite thing that existed, there was something tragic." Oh my, that almost brings tears to my eyes, because there have been so many amazingly beautiful things that I have had the privilege to take part in because of my own personal loss. I sat down with my dad several times and asked him questions about his childhood, about his military service, about his work, just about his life in general. I talked to my great aunt, who was in her late 90s, about my grandfather, her brother, and her parents. We looked at those old photos and the stories just flowed. I have talked with a great aunt on my husband's side as well, down in North Carolina, through her daughter, who so graciously would paint me a picture of life in the mountains of North Carolina back in the early 1930s. I've kind of made it a mission now to talk to all the older members of our family. And you know what? I found myself finding a new love for my own family and one for my husband's as well. We laugh that I now know more about my husband's family than he ever did. The sad reality is that all those people that I've had the privilege to talk with are no longer with us today. They might be physically gone, but they will never be forgotten, and their stories will live on. I have an aunt who is in the midst of her journey with Alzheimer's, and just a few weeks ago, I took my father's photo album up with me to my hometown, and I stopped in to see her. It had been a lot of years since I'd even talked with her, and my cousin had prepared me to expect her to not talk so much. So when I went there, I knew that I would be mostly chatting with my uncle. Well, it turned into a blessing for me, because walking into that room was like walking into my grandmother's home. You see, my aunt looks now so much like I remember my grandma looking and sounding. It felt like I had been transported back in time, and it felt good. It felt comfortable. And the most amazing thing happened as I began to show her the photos. She remembered them. She knew the people in the photos. She couldn't remember any stories about the people, but you could tell that just being able to recognize someone was making her very happy. She was laughing and really engaging all the time we were looking through those photos. My uncle told me some stories about my grandfather that I had never heard before. It was a different point of view, and it was amazing to hear those little snippets about the grandparents I thought I knew so well. I know that I'm in good company because everyone here is a family storyteller. So taking the next step back in time should feel really good. Kind of like opening the door to a new store and stepping in for that first time. Let's think about it for a minute. What draws your family into looking at your layouts and albums? Is it the pictures or is it the stories? Well, it's the same for your family history. Some of the stories you will encounter might make your jaw drop, or you might even find yourself shedding a tear. But the end result is that you start to feel a connection to your ancestors like never before. They really start to come to life, and as corny as that sounds, it really is true. I've seen it happen time after time with applicants to the Society of Indiana Pioneers. I've been their genealogist since 2006, and I've had the pleasure to meet and work with a lot of people. Most of them never touched their family histories until they decided to apply for membership. But the comment I hear the most is how much they loved learning about their ancestors. They were amazed at what they were able to find. For myself, I feel a much deeper attachment to my home state of Indiana because I've been able to trace my family back several generations to their beginnings within the state. But I also have found stories farther back in time that tie me to the Buckeye State as well. Then there's North Carolina, and there's Connecticut, and many other states back in the colonial times. You know, I couldn't have asked for a better story when I found that my ancestor Daniel Davis was part of a group called the Company of Ohio Associates, who traveled down the Ohio River in one of the largest boats at that time. On April 2nd, 1788, these 48 men went ashore, and my Daniel Davis declared that he wanted to be the first to fell a tree west of the Ohio River. Turned out to be a buckeye tree, and this act gave the state of Ohio its nickname. Now, could I have made this story up? I don't think so. I found pictures of my grandmother as a young woman that I wouldn't have had before if it weren't for Ancestry's trees and meeting a distant cousin. Or what about finding a letter written by my grandfather to a niece in 1956 telling about his family and how his grandfather came to Indiana before 1840. And it just goes on and on. Do you think I look at my country in a different way? I sure do, because now I have a connection to places outside of my beloved state of Indiana. Oh, I know what you might be thinking. Family history is for old, retired people. It all looks dingy. No one cares. It sounds boring. It's too expensive. Wah, wah, wah. A phrase I love to throw out when it comes to family history research is, there is no better reality show out there than our own family histories. And if you don't believe me, just take a few days and give it a try. I've been enjoying the process of sharing my journey as I work my way through all my research finders, pictures, and stories, merging them into a beautiful format that my family will hopefully actually want to look at. Gosh, we all have a story, don't we? My pathway to get here started with a degree in computers, and then marriage, and then my first child was born some 30 years ago this year. Funny how having children makes us all start to think about memory keeping. Just a few years later, and I was asked to learn Aldus PageMaker, which at the time was a desktop publishing software that was eventually taken over by Adobe. They wanted me to put together travel brochures for the travel bureau I worked for, so technically, I've been digitally working with layouts for a long time. And then when my son was in 4th grade, and he's in his mid-20s, late 20s now, he had to put together a family tree, and we traveled up to my parents' home to see what my mom had stuck away in a filing drawer. Well, it turned out she was really interested in the family history of both sides, so she had some charts she had begun to fill out. I picked them up, brought them back home, and now, several years and some 12 binders or so later, I have quite a bit of research work done on my family and my husband's family as well. My age is really going to show now because at one point I was a creative memories consultant and held my own paper scrapbooking workshops. My college background is in computers, so the move to digital scrapbooking seemed like an easy switchover. A few years back, I even worked part-time for a local scrapbook store where I taught some digital classes at the time. So this zigzagging path I've been on has brought me here, and I'm hoping that by the end of this course, you will already be planning on taking your own step back into time. But here's a question to think about. What drives us and our kids to pore over apps like Instagram? Well, it's those beautiful pictures, right? And the captions along with short stories. Those are like little presents waiting for us to read them and really appreciate what the pictures are all about. Let's look at family history research binders now. Can you hear the crickets? Yeah, I figured. I get the biggest eye rolls when I pull out my tomes of family goodness, but I get it. Most family history binders are just like mine, and they're filled with documents, copies of pages from books, maybe some photos, and lots of pedigree charts and family sheets. No comparison to the beautiful pages we can put together. Got you thinking? Well, let's get started.